back to the studio. So as we get our comparison started here, I think it's important to start by understanding what we're actually comparing here when we talk about a generator versus a solar PV system with batteries. And I suppose more importantly, let's think of it in terms of what we are not talking about. We are not talking about this. And we are not even talking about this. Because as wonderful as portable generators are, and some of them are quite powerful, they simply aren't the continuous duty solutions that we're talking about when we're talking about supplying power to your entire house for days or possibly even weeks. And so, additionally, though some of these portable generators can be rather powerful, by the time you get up into that 10 kilowatt range or so with the portable generators, you're talking about a portable generator that's so expensive that you could have purchased an installed generator that was twice as powerful. And that's what we're comparing it to. So for the purpose of this comparison, we're going to be comparing the Guardian 22 kilowatt natural gas powered generator to a solar PV system, 10 kilowatt system using 3 or 4 of Tesla's Powerwall 2 batteries. And to start us off, the first thing I think we need to make clear is that we're also likely not talking about a generator that's going to be running 24/7, 365. But instead, we're comparing using a generator for backup power. So right away, that sets up kind of another problem with this comparison in that we aren't really talking about an apples to apples comparison in this, more of a dollars and cents comparison, and we'll break that down as we move along. But because of that dollars and cents comparison, it's only fair for me to mention this, that a properly designed PV and battery system by design, it's not designed just to power the home rarely from, if the power goes out. No, just the opposite. It's designed to power the home continuously and rarely pull power off of the grid, only to supplement what the solar PV systems were not able to match the load in the house. So for those that have been following the Energy Sovereignty Project, you already know that we've done these tests for many weeks at a time where we've run our system completely off grid. We've just shut off the main power. We refer to that as zombie apocalypse mode. You'll see that in a couple of screenshots here. But here in our 11th month of our year-long test, to date, we have drawn 964 kilowatt hours from the grid. Now basically that would be what a average home using 30 kilowatt hours a day or so averaged out over the year. That's about what that home would use in a single month. In that same period, we've exported 836 kilowatt hours to the grid. Now, granted, if you're in a remote cabin, you're not going to be participating in net metering, so that 964 kilowatt hour figure may be the one that's really important to you. But also, if you live in a remote cabin in the woods, you're also not likely going to be schlepping propane up into the middle of nowhere to continuously run your generator either. So we do have to approach what we're discussing here realistically. So if you have a net metering agreement, as we do at the Energy Sovereignty Project, the result is that the difference between what we used and what from the grid and what we provided to the grid was 50 kilowatt hours, thereabouts. And that's less than 2 days of power at our average daily consumption. So during that 11 months that our system has produced power for the home, it's produced 13.2 megawatt hours of electricity. Now, of that production, 297 kilowatts went to the electric vehicle. Remember, we were talking before about value for money. Again, it's only fair, even though this is a discussion about generator versus a PV system for the home, it's got to be discussed, because the 297 kilowatt hours that went to that electric car was extra power. That's in addition to the energy that I already discussed that we put out to the grid. Now that allowed our car thus far, we're not even finished with the test quite yet, but that's allowed us to have driven already 9,493 miles on nothing but excess sunlight. And so that amount could have been sent to the grid, and then we would have gotten the net metering credits for that. But the value for money in charging the EV rather than paying for electricity or gasoline, that's far more valuable than those net metering credits were. And so you can see, trying to compare a generator to a well-scaled PV system from the standpoint of value for money, it's not going to be real straightforward. And so there are a lot of other things that you do have to consider, and I'm going to touch on a lot of those, and one of those you'll see later is actually in the generator's favor, interestingly enough, but we'll talk to that in a moment. But with all that said, let's go ahead and give that comparison a try. And what I've noticed is that people work best with real-world examples. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to showcase a series of actual power outages that we just had not far from here. So 76 miles from the Energy Sovereignty Project home, there's a little town called Nevada City. And I chose Nevada City because they were in an area that was rather hard hit by these recent outages. And it's someplace that's out of the way, but it's close enough that I could actually visit there and do some research on that by actually speaking with some of the individuals that lived there, and I did so. And so I wanted to get a feel for Nevada City and some of the businesses, and get some input from some of the locals to try and see what it was that that they went through, and have them help me understand what kind of systems they had, and then also by doing this video maybe present them with some aspects of my experience with the Energy Sovereignty Project that might be useful in helping them solve some of the issues that they have. So let's take a look at what actually happened. And so, as most of you know, California has had an issue with one of our major utility providers, PG&E. Because of the fuel accumulation in dead trees and ground cover and what have you in many parts of California, it's become a tinderbox. And so power lines that aren't properly cleared can blow around in high winds and create arcing, and then wind up igniting all of this fuel. And so California in general is pretty highly susceptible to bushfires, and so it's become more of a problem in recent years due to that poor management of getting rid of that fuel because of cost cutting and whatever. I won't go into detail regarding any of that, except to say that because of many factors, PG&E decided to start shutting the power down in certain areas that were of high risk. Well, the problem then is that these remote areas are all fed by systems in larger areas that have to go through larger towns and even some cities. And so when you shut down power to a remote area, other areas wind up getting involved, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Napa and in the Sierra foothills. So the city of Grass Valley and the towns of Glenbrook and Nevada City, those are just such areas. So when you hear about power being restored, it's important to note that many of the areas who have those substations that went down to provide power to the more remote areas, they never came back up during that entire thing. Not all of them come back up at the same time. So on the 23rd of October, we got word that there had been, or there was going to be, a shutoff in that area. And so when we started to get news reports from just before the power was shut off, and then once it had actually been shut off, at that time we decided that even though we weren't going to have our power shut off down here where the Energy Sovereignty Project was, but that we would then shut down our grid power and go into what I told you before, that zombie apocalypse mode that folks enjoy seeing our experiments with that to see how long the home is capable of running with the power completely shut off. So let me pull up, this is our log entry for the 23rd of October. And so by early afternoon, Grass Valley, Glenbrook, and Nevada City, they were all dark. And so parts of Grass Valley were actually restored by 6:22 that evening, but these were mostly the areas that were designated as Tier 1 by PG&E. These were areas that had lines that fed things like hospitals and fire stations and police stations, and I'm assuming also some critical infrastructure like water pumps and sewage treatment facilities and that kind of a thing. But most of the area had its power restored by the 24th. But we heard of another major issue that was going to be coming up. And again, like I said, most of the area had been restored. And so what that means is that there were still some pocket areas that never got their power back. The town of Nevada City did, but some outlying areas didn't. So because of that, what we decided to do is we decided to go ahead and leave our power shut off for the duration until everybody had gotten all their power back on and it wasn't looking like they were going to be getting hit by any further nonsense. So, sure enough, at 2 p.m. on Saturday the 26th, the power to that entire area was shut off again. And before we look at the 26th, let's go ahead and redirect your attention back to that log entry for the 23rd for a minute. So on the 6th line down, you see an entry called Total Solar Day. Now that entry shows how much power was in our battery system when the sun went down that day. And I'll explain a little bit about that part that says after charge in a minute. But I'd like to let you know why the system was at 100%. So a setting unique to the Tesla Powerwalls called Storm Watch can be selected by the owner of the system, and what that selection will do is it will charge the batteries to 100% from grid power and keep the batteries charged at 100% to be sure that you're ready for any incoming event. And so these events can be something like a hurricane or some other foreseeable events, exactly like these scheduled power outages that we were having. And so this gives the homeowner every possible advantage in the case of an outage. So what you will see here with the Storm Watch, even though our system was able to charge to 100%, as we go through here and look at how the system responded and how much power it was able to gather through sunlight, you'll see that even if you don't have the Tesla Powerwall batteries, even if you're using some other manufacturer's batteries, it really wouldn't have mattered that much anyway. But the Storm Watch feature is a handy thing to have. So let's talk about that other part of the entry there where it says 84% after charge. Again, I don't like to harp on this, but I think it's important to understand that since we're doing a comparison that is also about value for money, that we discuss it. And so the Energy Sovereignty Project isn't just about powering the home. The Energy Sovereignty Project also includes an electric vehicle transport into the mix, and so that 84% charge, system charge there recorded, is the result of 12 kilowatt hours of power being transferred from the home batteries into the vehicle to extend the range of the car. And so here's, just to pull this up real quick, this is the log entry for the day for the car. And before the power outage, the car had 64 miles of range. In the evening, after doing 19 miles of driving during the day, just kind of, again, this is what happened at our at the Energy Sovereignty Project home. But we're just trying to imagine if that home was actually in Nevada City, that we would have then been able to put 40 miles back to the car to end the day with 85 miles in case something did start to catch on fire and we had to get out of there. But This obviously doesn't have anything to do with running the house on a generator versus solar and batteries, but again, it'll factor heavily into our overall decision at the end. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. So as stated here in the log entries for the 24th and 25th, we let the system remain disconnected from the grid power in those days that were between the shutoff on the 23rd and the shutoff on the 26th. And so what that allows us to do is to take a look at those log entries. And on the 24th, the home used 18.2 kilowatt hours, and the solar system was it had produced 32.5 kilowatt hours. And then this power was banked in the batteries, and then the system started the day at 68% charge and ended the day at 97. And so then, as you see on the 25th, the home consumed 47.6 kilowatt hours, and again 20.6 kilowatt hours going to the house, and 27 kilowatt hours of charge had gone to the car. And this took the morning percentage in the system from 82% to 71. And then with the system producing 31.2, it wound up ending the day with a 94% charge in the home battery system. And so then we also ended the 25th then with 119 miles of driving available to the car. So Saturday the 26th, like we said, power goes out again in Nevada City. This time, however, it's not going to come right back on. This time it'll remain off for a further 4 days, and so that'll bring our total to about a week. So from the 26th to the 30th, some places around Nevada City didn't get their power restored until the 31st or November 1st. But for the discussion here, we'll just assume to the 30th. So for the period of these two shutdowns, what are the numbers? So in total, from the 23rd until the 30th of October, the home used 249.5 kilowatt hours of electricity. And 103 kilowatt hours of that production was able to be used for driving, and that amounts to about 300 miles or so. The solar PV system produced 255.2 kilowatt hours of power during that same period. So approximately 5 kilowatt hours or so more than was used by the home. And so that covered not only the home's usage, but it also covered that 300 miles of driving that we talked about. So I promised you this video would be comparing solar and batteries to a generator. And so now we're about to actually get to that. But before we do that comparison, let's just recap real quick about what we've done here. We've not only gone through this power outage here that we had, but even if there had been no outage, right, our grid usage for that period would still be zero. That is one of the major advantages with a solar PV system over a generator. We're not waiting for this event to happen. This is just what the system did natively. Let's have an honest look at the generator as an option. So now the generator that we chose again is this 22 kilowatt hour Guardian generator, and it's a natural gas operated generator with an impressive data sheet, and it's available for an installed price of around $6,000 or so, basically what somebody would pay for just a single Powerwall too. As described, it's low maintenance, automatically charges its own starter battery as part of its periodic self-checks, and it's also connected to Wi-Fi just like the Powerwall is, so that it can report its status as it goes through its health checks, and so it'll let you know if it's got any kind of a fault ahead of time, and that's so good, good system. So those who come to this channel do so because I approach these topics with honesty. I'm not looking to sell anyone anything. I'm simply here to kind of present a realistic option and then go over those options thoroughly enough so that consumers can make informed choices. So in speaking with several of the local shop owners in Nevada City, there is a mix of different factors that go into the decisions that they made as to whether or not they were going to use solar or generators. But as I'm speaking with them and asking the right questions, I realize that this isn't actually a black and white decision, nor is it really, as we've already discovered, a black and white comparison between the two technologies. And that's because there's an overlap. And that overlap is the batteries. So let me explain that. In speaking with the shop owners and the locals up there that had solar, they would also commonly have a generator, because solar alone won't power your inverter in case of an outage. And so that requires batteries. And once the batteries were installed, even a small bank of batteries, then one would use the emergency generator to charge the batteries and fill that gap between what the home was using and what solar could provide for the day. And so those that did have a generator for backup but no solar, then they had a slightly larger bank of batteries. And again, that got me thinking, what if that battery bank was huge? What if that were a Powerwall sized battery bank? So instead of what they considered as large, which would have been 5 kilowatts, 8 kilowatt size, because most of them were talking about lead acid batteries. What if we were talking about a bank of 1 or 2 Powerwalls, maybe even 3. So this comparison isn't really between a generator and solar with batteries. It's really more accurately a comparison between a generator with batteries versus solar with batteries. And so I probably made your head hurt, so let me explain that a little better. If in the situation that we were following before with the solar system, if you had to run your system for those 7 days between the 23rd and the 30th or 31st, and you were using a generator, you'd still have to run that generator 24/7 no matter what the load was. If you had a light bulb on that you wanted to keep on, that generator would have to remain on. Well, that's a little silly. Why don't you have a bank of 2, 3, maybe even 4 of the Powerwall 2 batteries, and then run the generator twice for half an hour each time, and then have that cover your daily use? And so with that in mind, let's look at those numbers again. So the total use for the home over those 7 days, yeah, let's even include what we had for the car, and we'll just call it 250 kilowatt hours. So let's say we had 4 Powerwalls to keep the math neat, and so then that winds up at so we got 50 kilowatts or so of usable capacity. Each Powerwall has an inflow of 5 kilowatts, also an outflow of 5 kilowatts, and the generator has a rating of 22 kilowatts. And so on its high power mode, we can charge the system to full in about 2 hours, and once full, the system will power the home for a couple of days. This time of year, again, using that 30 kilowatt hour a day yearly range. Generally, what we find in this time of the year, we're in that kind of 20 kilowatt hour a day range. So over the course of our week-long outage, the generator will have run for a total of 12 hours. Now, that sounds a whole lot better than expecting to run for 168 hours straight. So the cost looks better too, something on the order of $50 or so, as opposed to $400 or so to run it continuously for a week. Now again, I'm open for others to look at the data sheet for this Guardian generator and tell me that I'm out of my mind, it'll cost less or more or whatever. I think I'm pretty close in that estimate there. So for homes, perhaps a generator like that 22 kilowatt Guardian generator with a battery or 2 might actually be appropriate, might work fine. But not if the town burns. If the town burns, PG&E is going to shut off the natural gas line. So this is an excerpt from that same period in October from the area around the Kincaid fire. So their little town in Kincaid burned. And unlike the PG&E shutoff that we had in Nevada City, the areas involved in the Kincaid fire not only had their power shut off from the 26th to the 31st, first, but they also had their gas shut off. And so if continuous operation is required, you could have either a natural gas tank or a gasoline tank, depending on what kind of a generator you had. But the problem with that option is that if your gas line is already cut off because the nearby town is on fire, I'm not sure if it's all of that great an idea to have the fuel for your generator just sitting around the property in a big tank. I don't know. So, though it may be a necessary decision because of shade or I don't know how much area you have, room constraints, what your roof looks like, it might be a decision that's forced for you to have a generator instead of solar. Even if I had a generator solution, I'd still want to probably have a couple of the Powerwall batteries. And if I purchased a 4 Powerwall PV system and lived someplace where it snowed, equally I'd also probably want to have a generator. It snows, the PV system can't keep up with your daily demand, generator kicks on. So that too is something that I also accept as something that is absolutely true. And again, that from speaking with the folks up there. So now let's talk value for money versus cost. So all of this, like we've just discussed, depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. In a household where you're only trying to keep a couple of lights on and run the fridge, you're probably not going to be overly concerned with massive amounts of power generation. Having the town shut down is probably more of a hassle than trying to power your home is. But if you have people in the home that require something like an oxygen concentrator or, heaven forbid, something like a respirator, then your concern about keeping ample power flowing is rather profound. And in that case, then the addition of, like I discussed before, a $5,000 to $6,000 generator and a PV system with a battery is probably likely the prudent solution if you're going to wind up living someplace in like Nevada City as opposed to living down in a city where there's less likelihood that you're going to wind up having a power failure. But then that brings us around to the cost. Hands down, it's going to be cheaper to install a 22 kilowatt hour generator than it is to install a PV system. The installed prices that I was able to get in this area is around $6,000 or so, maybe $10,000 if modifications have to be made to your home's electrical panel and you want to put a concrete poured pad to isolate the thing. But that generator just sits there. If you're not using it, it just sits there. And even when you are using it, then that only adds to the cost of running the generator. Adding batteries, as in our example earlier, that greatly reduces the cost to run the generator, but then they just sit there. They're really not doing anything except, again, waiting for that backup condition. Now, by contrast, the current rebates that we have for if you were using, say, a 4 Powerwall 2 system with 10 kilowatts of solar production, it would be around $40,000, but that replaces your power bill. If your home uses around 30 kilowatt hours a day, that's kind of where that's where this is all scaled to. So that cost goes down a little bit further if your home uses less and you don't require a system that large, but if you have an electric car, that return on the investment actually becomes even greater. And then if your home usage isn't that great, but you want to try and add in an EV, that's something also that's added into the mix. And again, for us, that's right around $2,000 a year in gasoline savings alone. So lastly, I'd like to talk about size and placement. And so earlier I mentioned that I had the opportunity to speak with several of the shop owners in Nevada City, and one common issue that many of them mentioned was how much room they actually have for a system. And obviously a generator would be a problem for them. If you're a shop owner, or even if they did own their own building with a generator, they're stuck trying to find a place outside to put it, and that's simply maybe unworkable for certain locations in town. And so obviously private residence is less of an issue. But solar and batteries are usually an easier fit for that type of a situation. And again, as you've seen with the Energy Sovereignty Project, the 6 Powerwall 2 batteries that we have, and that gives us again a usable capacity of 80 kilowatt hours, those easily fit along one wall of our garage, and that would be the kind of system that would be able to supply something like a small grocery store or that type of a thing, to allow its food to remain frozen during an outage and everything to remain cool. And then the added bonus to something like that, rather than using just a generator, is that even when there isn't a power outage, it still then acts to greatly reduce your overall utility bill. So those are things to keep in mind. And then with the shade and space constraints, not all solutions are going to work for everyone. And so, listen to me ramble on about this. What's our conclusion? Well, if the decision wasn't forced by circumstances that made it impossible to install solar and batteries, that would be my choice. Solar and batteries. A generator just sits there until it's needed, and it costs money to maintain, and its value is based solely on its ability to save more in lost goods and productivity than the generator costs to install, maintain, and then to run. But by contrast, if you have a solar PV and battery system that's matched to your home's needs, it'll begin to repay your investment as soon as it goes online. And but again, as we discussed, if I lived up near an area like Nevada City where there's snow, I'd buy a generator too. So that's kind of where we're at. So I'd like to close this video, and then we'll open the comment sections to any questions that you might have. And I would like to, at this point, thank the wonderful people, the folk that I met there in Nevada City. I was able to speak with several folks up there. Special thanks to the gals at My Favorite Things. That's a curiosity shop up there. And then the wonderful proprietors and patrons of McGee's Purveyors of Fine Spirits Bar and Grill up there. And hi to Otis the dog as well. So finally, I'd like to give a quiet moment of thanks to our wonderful first responders and firefighters, and a moment of reflection to those that have lost so much in these fires. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.